Hello! There are quite a few videos and articles all over the internet about how to win in Monopoly. I have written a Monopoly Python simulator and I have tested if those tips actually help by simulating a few millions of games. Let's see what I found out. This is the second video in the Monopoly series. In the first one, I was trying to see if Monopoly naturally tends to end up being endless, finding out that, well, watch the video, it's right there. Today, however, let's use the simulator for more practical things, namely testing Monopoly tips. I have read through probably a dozen, maybe more, of various articles with Monopoly tips. Some of them rehash some common bits of advice, some offer something more or less unique. Anyway, I grouped all the things in several experiments, and we start with this. Not quite a real experiment, but these nuggets of wisdom are in virtually every set, so let's get them out of the way first. Be nice, be merciless, be quiet. Pick the smallest token. Needless to say, I'm not going to test any of these, because all of them are obviously true. So let's leave these suggestions alone and jump into the actual experiment. Let's talk about the order in which players make their moves in the game. How is it decided? Sometimes players would get a roll of dice to determine that. Sometimes, I would imagine, it would just be whoever sits next to the banker, that person goes first, or whoever yells shotgun the loudest, or something along those lines. All this is not canon. Official rules are silent with regard to who goes first. More important question, does the order really matter? And if it does, how much? And this is exactly what my first experiment is about. The thing I will be measuring is a percentage of games where players survived after 1000 turns. Most of the simulations will be 100,000 games long. Some will be 1 million games long, where I need a better precision. And all these applies to a game of 4 players who are willing to trade to complete their monopolies. And obviously no house rules. Alright, here we go. We have 4 players, A, B, C and D. In the first run, I assign their order randomly. And as all other characteristics, their playing strategies and everything else is exactly similar, they obviously ended up with about the same results. Roughly around 30% survival rate. Now, let's do the same thing, but this time player A always goes first, player B is always second, C third, and D is always the last one to go. Will the outcome be different? Turns out yes. Being the first one increases your chances by about 13% compared to the previous run. Being last decreases your survival chances by 10%. This is not some small potatoes. So, first tip from me, if you really want to win at Monopoly, your best shot is to be the first to go. So, I don't know, use all your social capital. Ask, beg, bribe, fib, threaten, blackmail, all just to be the first one to cast the dice. Note for all further experiments, I will always use random shuffling of players to control for this effect. So, okay, now to the actual wisdom of Monopoly tips articles from the internet. Personally, I didn't see the rationale in this advice. What's the worst that can happen, really? Like, by not buying it, you only increase the chance of someone else buying it. I guess there could be some very specific circumstances where it makes sense, but these are quite rare. So, going in, I thought any piece of advice that says don't buy something would be proven wrong. And there are quite a few. Don't buy railroads. Ignore greens. Utilities are a waste of time. Browns are too cheap to bother. Dark blue are too far to anyone to reach them. In every tip list there will be a not to buy item. Let's see if any of those are true. This is how the experiment works. There are 4 players, A, B, C, you already know them, and let's call the 4th one Steven. Steven is an experimental player. He will ignore certain properties, just like those tips tell him to do. So we will have 10 simulations, each of 100,000 games, to see if Steve's reluctance to own a certain type of real estate affects his chance to survive compared to the other 3 players. Let's find out. This is the raw data. It's a bit messy, so let me calculate the difference between Steven and an average of 3 other players as a percentage of that average. It might be a little bit complicated, so let me say it again. This is the effect of ignoring the property. So low negative numbers means it was a mistake to ignore them. You should have bought it. Positive numbers, you were right to ignore it in the first place. It made your average result better. So I hope I didn't confuse you too much, and here are the results. The most valuable property is indigo, or dark blue if you have no idea what indigo is. Infamous Park Place and Boardwalk. I hear people say, yeah, it has a high rent at all, but hardly anyone will end up in these parts of the board, so it's not that great. Wrongo. It is the color group, ignoring which will have the most negative impact. It's followed by railroads as the second most valuable group, which wasn't surprising for me at all. Every 10th square in the game is a railroad. The rent goes up if you have several stations, and you don't need to build houses for that. Actually, ignoring railroads puts you in a worse position than ignoring orange, and this is saying something. Orange is in the third place. Not very surprising, because literally every tip set has some version of buy orange in it. What is surprising though is that it's only in the third place and not too far ahead of any other color groups. Brown, owing to the fact that it's the cheapest set, has kind of a bad press. Reality is, ignoring it is only marginally worse than ignoring oranges. Then we have pink and light blue. Red, often touted as the second best after orange, is only in 7th place. Haha. Then yellow, and then something that actually was a surprise for me. You see, I thought any colored property had some value, some more, some less, but there will be some benefit of buying it. And what do you know? That one advice, don't bother buying greens, is actually kinda true. It will not bring you any benefits, but it will not damage your chances if you own it either. Amazing! So greens are indeed nothing more but useless ballast, statistically speaking. Buying utilities actually puts you at a disadvantage, and ignoring utilities will give you a small but consistent edge over opponents. Not a huge advantage, that is, but an advantage nonetheless. Who could have thought? So collectively, advice about ignoring indigo properties is awful and wrong. So is the one about ignoring railroads. Advice about ignoring utilities is actually correct. And advice about green is very surprisingly not wrong, although it will not give you any advantage either. So I'll use a very scientific term, nah, to mark the results of this experiment. Now, let's move on to our next topic, building stuff. When it comes to building houses, there are 2 major pieces of advice migrating from one list to another. They're actually quite different, so let's look at them one by one. The first one is what is sometimes called a magic number 3 rule. It's a bit complex, so here's my understanding of it. Obviously, you should be building houses on your properties, no question about it. But what if you have 2 or even 3 monopolies and a limited amount of money? What shall you do? Should you build everything up to hotels on the cheapest property first, because it's cheaper? Or should you buy hotels on the expensive group first, because it means higher rent? Or, and this is the point of the strategy, you need to be smart about it. First, build exactly 3 houses everywhere. Only then proceed to hotels. The reason given is that return of investment is the highest when you build 3 houses. Sometimes this advice is accompanied by the screenshot of an Excel table with numbers and some color scale conditioning formatting, which is really nice. Whoever did the table did nice work, obviously. Now, question, does following this strategy really result in an increased chance of success? Let's see. Frankly, I rooted for this strategy to be a good one. I like it how it's kind of smart and ingenious. I like how it's based on data. I like the colors of that Excel table. Everything is great about this strategy. I even run another million game simulation to test it. And here are the results. Well, it's not like it has no effect, but the effect is quite small, really. Next strategy is another popular one known as create house shortages or don't buy hotels. You probably know the rationale behind this one. Since there are only 32 houses in the set, you can potentially use up all or most of them and prevent your opponents from building on their properties. Well, let's see if this scenario is supported by the simulation. And it's not true. Not building hotels actually damages your chances of success, and I understand there may be indeed situations where it works, say in case you have 3 monopolies, 3, 3 and 2 properties in them. If you take it as a general rule, as a rule, don't build hotels, it's a bad one. Alright, lastly, there's one more question we can settle. When you buy property or you build houses and hotels, how much money should you invest in all these things and how much you should keep? In case, well, there may be any number of reasons to have money on hand. So is there a magic amount of money to keep, sort of as an emergency fund, that will give you the maximum advantage over your opponents? Let's have an experiment. For this one, I played our old friend Steve against our old friends and Steve's arch nemesis players A, B and C. I set a few options regarding the cash on hand: 500, 200, 100, 50 and 0. So let's play each option against others and see which one gives Steve the biggest advantage. Here are the results. You can see that the lower your emergency fund is, the better are your chances of success, and it goes all the way down to 0. So literally, it's better to spend everything, all the cash you have, to buy something. If you end up in some force majeure situation, you can always sell houses or mortgage property and then unmortgage and rebuild houses back. Turns out that losses that you suffer from this mortgaging, unmortgaging, building, selling still have less impact than having money and not using it. And if you start saving as much as 500, you are in a big trouble doing this. Now, small technical detail to address. If you were looking closely at this table, you might have noticed something, and you might be saying now, how come your diagonal have non-zero numbers? Wasn't it like 4 absolutely identical players playing absolutely identically? Now, this is a perfect opportunity to segue into a quick note about margin of error in all this simulation. The margin of error is about 1% for most experiments, and for some things, when I run higher simulation, 1 million games, the margin of error was reduced to about 0.3%. Alright, that's it. That was all the experiments I have conducted. Let me know what you think, how counter these results are to your experience. But remember, I have no dog in this fight. I did it purely from a mathematical/statistical point of view. Are there any other testable theories and monopoly strategies you think are worth testing? Let me know in the comments. Hope you enjoyed this video. If so, smash that like button, subscribe for more, and see you in the next video.